Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. I'm Ben Ratliff, and I'm joined by my friends and yours, Scott Edberg and Jared Nelson. And I'm going to skip all the normal pleasantries today because we have got sort of a different type of episode. We've had a few of these lately where we're engaging on some matters coming before the General Assembly in just a couple weeks as we record. So we're glad to welcome our friend David Strain to the show to talk about the ad interim committee on Christian Nationalism. That may or may not be the official title. I don't remember. But I'm just here to introduce. Jared has graciously offered to take over and discuss some of these things with David, and Scott and I are going to kind of sit off to the side and jump in where we feel like we want to, but I'm not sure that's going to happen very much. At least I don't think Scott is. I'm pretty committed not to as well. So, Jared, you and David can take it away.
Well, first, David, do you want to introduce yourself and say what it is that you did to get stuck with what you are to get named as the convener for the Christian Nationalism?
Well, so I'm really glad to be with you, brothers. Good to see you all. Happy to talk about our committee's work and to invite your prayers and the prayers of your listeners for our report, our ongoing work, should the Assembly agree to extend our remit for a further year, and indeed for the Assembly as a whole. I was opposed to the overture that called for the establishment of Christian Nationalism study, and said so when I served on the Overtures Committee last year when we debated it, and then I sat down and I listened to more debate, listened to brother after brother from across the spectrum of philosophy of ministry and different presbyteries and around the country standing up and saying, this is causing us significant difficulty and challenge on the ground where we are in our congregations. We need help. And I changed my mind, and I stood up in the committee and said, I think, fathers and brothers, we need to listen to our brethren, and they are asking us to help them, and I don't know how we refuse that. And then I got a text. I actually texted Kevin DeYoung, the moderator, and said, hey, I think I made a mistake. I think I may have swayed the committee to vote for this thing. And I said, if you can't find anyone else, I'm willing to serve as a part of the committee. That was really all I was willing to do. Which I did with some trepidation, and then Kevin asked me to chair it, probably because everyone else was more aware of what that would mean than I was, and said absolutely not and under no circumstances. So I've been chairing the study committee for the last year.
Well, one of the things I think maybe even going into that meeting, into overtures, was the question, what is Christian nationalism? I didn't know if maybe your committee figured it out. I mean, what exactly was the breadth of what you're covering? Because everybody has a different definition, so sure. It could be a really wide study or a narrow study. What did you end up narrowing down to?
Well, I think we've tried to acknowledge that Christian nationalism is an unfortunate. It is a thing, but it's a thing with fuzzy edges, a bit like Ben Ratliff, I suppose. A thing with fuzzy edges, right? So there's lots of. There's lots of definitions out there, and the reality is that Christian nationalism is a movement comprised of a number of shared sensibilities and convictions, but it has significant diversity within it. It's a network of individuals, ministries, churches, online, in print, and it's something of a moving target as a result. And there's constantly new things being written all the time. And there are different strands to that movement, from the sort of new apostolic reformation, sort of charismatic version, to what we might identify as something more closely aligned to the old theonomy type movement in the Reformed world, to all the way to things that are pretty extreme ethno-nationalist and white supremacist tendencies. Some of the folks who are advocating for this are, I think, honestly seeking to engage in a project of theological retrieval, looking especially at 17th century high orthodox political theology and saying there's been a welcome recovery of Reformed Orthodox treatments on things like the doctrine of God that's been a blessing to the church. Why don't we do the same with political theology? And so that's one slice of this discussion. There are others with various overlapping interests and some additional concerns. Some are very concerned that we are living in a trash world, or the longhouse, or a gynocracy. In other words, there's a sort of a woke right, to use Neil Shenvi's phrase here. If you're familiar with that way of thinking about it, we all understand what we mean, I think, by the woke left, that we are living in a society that is governed by a set of unexamined structural biases that privilege, from the perspective of the left, the woke left, that privilege white Anglo-Saxon men. And that what needs to happen in order for there to be an equitable and just society is that people should be awakened to that unexamined, unnoticed set of assumptions and biases that lead to oppression and injustice. And in some versions of that, the way to wake people up is to use shock tactics and be provocative and confrontational. Well, there's a very similar paradigm in some segments of the right, both the theological and socio-political right, that agrees with the woke left that we are living in a society governed by a system of oppression and privilege. But the woke right says the people that are being oppressed are white Anglo-Saxon men, and that it's actually an effeminized society. It's a progressive left-wing culture that is doing the oppressing. But again, they will agree that the way to wake people up is to use shock tactics. And so you sometimes find provocative speech, to say the least, unclean speech, I would say, vile language and things like that. And so Christian nationalism sort of covers all of this. It's not been helped, honestly, by the use made of that name by the media in political discourse. So the media, essentially everything that the left-wing media doesn't like, it immediately calls Christian nationalist. So things that all conservative Christians would affirm, like abortion is murder, well, that's Christian nationalist. Or if you believe that only men can be ordained to office, that's a whole other podcast. Only men can be ordained to office. Right, so there's things that would be very much sort of in the mainstream of our convictions as the Presbyterian Church in America, and that's written off as Christian nationalist. But then so is ethno-nationalism and white supremacy. And if that's all Christian nationalism, you can see how it really creates difficulty in identifying what we're talking about. So our committee hasn't tried to say Christian nationalism just is only this one thing and not that thing. But what we've tried to identify is a series of shared concerns about the relationship between the church and the state, and the nature of state power and its appropriate limits. And that's really where the central debate lies. And then there are some ethical matters that have come along with some strands of the Christian nationalist movement that we also wanted to flag as dangerous and needed to be called out in a faithful church context, particularly misogyny and racism and vile speech.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of things that are getting stewed together in our contemporary moment with this, because when I thought about it, I always tried to untangle the idea of kind of a ethno-nationalism versus there's a Christian influence on the government, and whether that's nursing fathers or establishmentarian.
Yes.
And I guess I've thought that way because I'm in an area that has a lot of RP influence near where Geneva College is and the RP seminary. And they very much are establishmentarians in principle, and yet hate kinism. I mean, they just excommunicated in my backyard, basically, at a trial that happened, somebody that was involved with that. So I wonder if you have any thoughts of, you were tasked to do this, and yet there's kinism, there's Christian nationalism in terms of like government. How did these two things come together, or are they different? How did you untangle that to say what's the real issue or the pastoral need that's here?
Yeah, I think that there are really valid, important, useful discussions happening about political theology. And we need to have those discussions. And you can't talk about Christian nationalism without weighing in on those matters to some extent. And we've done that to a point. And then there's an overlay kind of out there on the interwebs about kinism, ethno-nationalism, white supremacy. And many of those who would claim to be Orthodox Christians are seizing upon conservative theological and ethical norms and conservative political norms, and how in American history, at least in the 20th century especially, those things have often been allied together, and also seizing upon the reaction in the culture among young men to what they perceive to be the effeminization of society. There's a lot of angry young men looking for a different model, and they're combining all of that, and they're sort of using it for nefarious ends. They want to claim that they are we're only representing historic Christian thought here. And they're willing to say many of the same things that those who are engaged in political theological retrieval projects are also saying about the church and the state. But they also want to push it further and say, well, the implications of that are that nations can really only survive when they're comprised of a single ethnicity, or that, and this comes up in our report, the ordo amoris, the rightly ordered loves, validates privileging love for one's own kin, in scare quotes. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I don't care about people who are not like me, but I'm going to prefer and privilege people who are like me. And so there you see the sort of sleight of hand that's being done to bring in, frankly, wicked prejudices and biases that need to be called out for what they are. So there is definitely some of that going on. Having said that, it doesn't mean that establishmentarianism, or the view that the civil magistrate should exercise direct legislative influence in the formal promotion of Trinitarian Protestant Christianity in the public square, doesn't mean that that's not Christian nationalism. So there's lots of shades here, yeah. and our committee tried to avoid the danger of trying to write a comprehensive political theology for the Presbyterian Church in America. That was not what we were invited to do. That was well beyond our power or scope, certainly beyond my gifts and skill. What we did try to do is to say, noticing the range of views out there, which of these views do we think we can clearly say are out of bounds, are problematic, and need to be flagged, both in terms of their ethics, but sometimes also in terms of their confessional status. And then we're going to leave the range of opinion within those bounds entirely unresolved. It is not our desire to litigate. For example, you raised the nursing fathers, or countenance and maintain, as the Larger Catechism uses that language. I think that's 191. What does that mean? Does that mean what it almost certainly meant in 1646, that the civil magistrate will, both in law and with finance, for example, ensure that the church flourishes, that the state will use public tax money to fund ministers' salaries? Or does it mean only that the civil magistrate will tolerate and ensure that society has such provisions of justice and equity that the true religion may flourish according to its internal organic genius? There's a range of opinion, and there are probably many shades between those two poles. And to what extent are they both compatible with 1788, which is the confession that the Presbyterian Church in America adheres to? And that was our work, that was our project, not a comprehensive blow-by-blow response to everything that a Christian nationalist of whatever shade might ever have said, but to take some of the big issues, the most obvious and pressing matters, some of the theological and ethical red flags that we were seeing. It is for the courts of the church to determine how successful we've been or will be when we finally finished our work. But that's what we're trying to do. That is admittedly an enormous task, and will inevitably prove dissatisfying to some people. And yet I still think it's possible for us to speak in broad terms about a movement that has some identifiable features and offer some critique of that.
Yeah, I think that was helpful in that there does seem to be, when you're talking about the subject of Christian government, there's this wide range of views that have been in the church and that can function within the church. Whereas the idea of racial supremacy is not something that has a wide range in which we should tolerate things. And so that's why I thought the pastoral letter was particularly helpful in there. And then you have different parts to this report. There's a pastoral letter, affirmations and denials. You had this area in which you were laying out categories in which you tried to label these: general influence, nursing fathers, establishmentarian, theonomist, and ethno-nationalist, and try to classify between those. And then about the 1788 versus the 1646. So there's a lot of things that were going on there, and as well as some pastoral counsel to like welcoming visitors and things on that. What do you think is the most important of those sections, maybe, that has been worked on that is needful now? Because you're going to take another year to work on some things, but what do you think is the most helpful and needful now?
It's difficult to say exactly, because those three sections are doing slightly different things, right? So the pastoral letter is probably the kind of thing you can put in an elder's hands and say, we can get into more granular detail about the theological issues involved and how to think about our confession and so on, and the historical theology that you need to weigh. And we can do that, and we probably need to do that with our elder. But there are churches, and this was part of our mandate from the assembly. And we were hearing this on the floor of the Overtures Committee last year. There are churches who need help right now responding to angry young men who are just coming after their pastors and elders and causing some significant disruption. And how do we deal with this when there's language being used, there's attitudes being displayed that do not reflect biblical values? And so that's the pastoral letter. It is what it says. It's a pastoral letter trying to put some markers down to say, well, we can talk about political theology, but heads up, we're not going to tolerate these things. The affirmations and denial are, I think, on their own already pretty helpful in saying, here are some of the poles within which we're trying to navigate and exist as a church. The rest of the report, should the assembly agree to extend our remit, I hope will provide a lot more historical, theological, scriptural, and contemporary analytical data that will help make the point and provide the background for many of those affirmations and denials. They are effectively our conclusions, as it were. And these will be appendices that will be added to this material that will provide some exegetical work, some historical work, and some contemporary survey of the landscape right now. And that I think will really help there. So the affirmations and denials are meant to serve as a bit more of a theological thing and less of a pastoral thing. And then the pastoral and constitutional and pastoral advice sort of section there is doing a bit of historical theology. It's looking at the Constitution, the PCA. It's looking at previous assemblies' work. It's looking at preliminary principles. It's looking at giving a bit of a taxonomy and trying to evaluate each of those in their own right. And so it's doing a bit of both. It's doing some theological work and it's doing some pastoral work. And so it really depends on the need of the group that you're talking to. Do you need to give somebody a short, clear, here are the ethical issues involved, and these are our non-negotiables? The pastoral letter is helpful. Do you need to lay down some things that we don't need to be defensive about, that we can all affirm together, and then clearly articulate where we think there's a problem or a line in the sand that we don't want to cross? That's what the affirmations and denials are about. Or do you want something that's a bit more long form that you could possibly teach through, say in a Sunday school class or with a session or in officer training or something like that? Then the constitutional and pastoral advice section is what that's about. So I'm not sure I can pick one that's the most important thing. I don't know that I would approach it that way. This is an attempt to fulfill the different aspects of the remit given to us. We think there's more work to be done. There's probably about 2/3 more material that we've already written. It's just not ready. We've got more work to do that will be appended to this to provide supporting, and it'll be much more scholarly. It'll be extensively footnoted so that people can follow up primary sources and secondary sources. And that's all coming. I think one benefit to us as a committee, and hopefully to the whole church, of doing it the way we're doing it with a partial report, is that it will allow us to hear feedback and to nuance what we've done and to tweak and improve if we have to in any areas that, and there are sort of surface tweaks that I'm already being made aware of, relatively minor corrections, and then there are more substantive things, and I've solicited some of that from critics that I've heard from already. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure whether I ask for it or not, I'll receive it. But I want to be open to that and grateful for it. And I can't promise that we will incorporate anyone's feedback, since it's a committee work and not my work.
Yeah.
But I do think that's an opportunity that will hopefully strengthen our final report, even the section that's coming to the Assembly right now.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about that, and it sounds like you already are saying that there might be some tweaking or maybe defining of terms that may help to clarify things. So I just think about the importance of this in terms of being very pointed in the areas it needs to be, especially in kinism, that there aren't any other things that distract. So it's helpful to hear that some of that work is ongoing. Yeah. So is the rest of the work that the committee wants to do, maybe some expanding or tweaking on some of the report, but what else is additional? You said there's some more scholarly work or appendices.
Yeah, so
what's going to be in there?
We're working on a Bible section. We are Protestants. I can't bring myself to submit a report on a theological topic without exegesis. I actually think that that's been one of the weaknesses of a great deal of the discussion out there on all sides. It has been political, it's been historical, it's been somewhat theological, it's been sociological. It has not been terribly exegetical. There's been some, but we could do better, and we would like to try. Whether we do and how successful we'll be in the end, again, is for the courts of the church to decide. So we want to look at a number of key texts, the sort of locus classicus texts in the tradition that relate to the question of the relationship between the church and the state. And then we want to do some historical survey. The historical landscape is enormous, and so it needs to be survey, and that will no doubt be frustrating to some, that we're not camping out and talking about their favourite decade or favourite century, that we're not going blow by blow through Samuel Rutherford or the Hodges or Witherspoon or the Southern Presbyterians, or all of those have to be mentioned, but they can only be mentioned or else the report will be vast beyond utility. So it'll be a historical survey. And then there's a survey of the contemporary landscape, and I've seen the initial drafts of that, and in some ways that could be amongst the most helpful sections of the whole report. Because what it does is it names names, it names movements, it names authors, it also provides a taxonomy of different groups. It tries to highlight the way that these individuals, movements and groups are interconnected and how they're connected, how they share platforms, how they promote each other's material. We don't believe in guilt by association, right? Just because I might have a friend who's a bad guy doesn't mean that I'm a bad guy. But that doesn't also mean that if I am not critical of a bad guy's views, if I retweet a bad guy's views, even if the view I retweet is perfectly fine, it is reasonable for those who read my stuff to ask critical questions about my credibility and the reliability of my opinions. And so it's really important for us to see how there is definitely a network of relationships, and that's quite eye-opening, frankly. And really useful. I think that sometimes what happens is that angry young men looking for robust engagement with their issues go online and they find someone speaking to their issues, and then they find that person retweeting someone else, and one thing leads to another and leads to another, and before you know it, you're getting involved with the Stone Choir, or you're listening to Nick Fuentes, and hearing some pretty shocking anti-Semitic, racist, foul speech about women and so on.
Yeah, I actually had like 10 different questions, and I asked like 4, and then you answered them all like basically within your answers. So I just kind of wonder too, if you have any things that you're particularly hoping for in terms of what people are going to get out of this report, but also like, are you looking for some feedback? You probably don't need more people writing to you necessarily, but what are you looking for in terms of feedback?
Yeah, that's good, Jared. I'll welcome all the feedback that I get. I shouldn't say that. I won't welcome all the feedback that I get. Some of the feedback that I'll get isn't nice, but I'll welcome all good faith attempts to engage with our work. This is a preliminary report, so that means we're not asking the Assembly to adopt anything. It's essentially coming to the Assembly as information. We want you to see what we're doing, the progress we've made. We feel pretty good about this work that we've done, but we're not pretending for a moment that it's beyond critique. And I'm quite sure that there will be things people will identify, language, phraseology that needs to be tightened, arguments that could be better or sharper, and all of that's welcome in what we're already bringing. I'd like these sections to be the best they can be. Mm-hmm. But we also hope to add in appendices the Bible, history, and contemporary landscape sections as supporting evidence, as it were, supporting documents that will be much more meaty in terms of the scholarly apparatus that they provide. What we wanted was for the partial report to sort of show the Assembly that we're trying to write with the average informed ruling elder in mind. Somebody who's having to engage with these issues wants to be informed with them. So there aren't really any footnotes in this partial report. This is not that this is trying to provide simple, clear definitions. We then want to go on to provide more material for those who want to dive deeper. So we've got a lot of work still to do. We've done a lot of work that isn't ready for public consumption yet. I hope that we will not spend more than the rest of the summer trying to get this done. That sometime in the fall, we'll have the whole thing finished. And as soon as we have it finished, it'll go live and you'll be able to see it. And you'll have, however many months left to shred the whole thing and take it apart, no doubt. But our desire in terms of what it is we're seeking to accomplish is, well, the mandate we were given, I think it was Overture 46, I think it was to provide pastoral counsel and clear direction, and to speak especially to 1788 and 1646, the American revisions to the Westminster Standards and their relationship to the original, and to try to offer our view, which is only our view. We're not a court of the church, and so we are not ruling from on high about who needs to declare what differences to the standards, but offering our view about where we think those differences might be. We've done some of that already in the preliminary report, but that was what we were charged to do. We're trying to serve the church as effectively as we can, equip officers in the church, and let the courts of the church have some tools to use, for example, in the examination of candidates.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do find the pastoral letter to be helpful. Maybe at least we can commend that for if the rest is a little bit of a work in progress for tweaking. But thanks for your work on this. Scott, Ben, do you have any other questions that are kind of lingering in your mind right now that you'd like to have Dr. Strain answer?
David, are you on social media so that we can send people to harass you and ask you?
I'm not, and for that I praise the Lord.
That's right. Scott, you good?
You're muted.
Yeah. I'm assuming, Jared, that you're good to go.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had any kind of final words about the process. I mean, about being on the committee. I'm sure there was diversity of opinions, especially on Christian government on the committee. And what was the experience of being on a committee in which you knew there was probably some sharp disagreements about what the nature of a Christian magistrate should do is?
Well, there's some ironies, that you put the British guy to chair a report on Christian nationalism in America, and who was ordained in the Free Church of Scotland under the 1646 in an establishmentarian denomination.
Yep.
And then, I have a D-Min. I'm a pastor. I'm not an historian. I'm not a an OT, NT scholar. I'm not a systematician. I'm an ordinary pastor, and I'm in a room full of colossal brains and, really gifted academics and men who have worked in the field of constitutional scholarship or in law, or who do so currently. And they brought a lot of wisdom, a lot of insight, but they also, you're right, they also have a range of opinion and sometimes significant differences. And it was my job to herd those cats. And they all acted with godly grace and decorum. I'm very thankful for all of them and the contributions that they've made and will make. It hasn't always been a straightforward process. We all have our interests and convictions, and we want to advocate for them. And that's what makes for a good product, hopefully, in the end. Inevitably, a thing like this is a compromise document, and we're trying to have a committee that is of one mind in the things that we're saying. I think if you were to ask various members of the committee, maybe everyone on the committee would say there are phrases in here, sections of this, sentences that we wouldn't say like that. We would say it like this. Mm-hmm. But we're working together on it collaboratively, and that's both a great challenge and an enormous privilege and joy to be a part of something like that, to see brothers listen well, press toward each other to try and find language that we can share. There's something enormously satisfying and I think honoring to the Lord Jesus that I hope is a model for us all as we engage with each other, that there often is more common ground than we realize. And if we would listen well to one another, in our denomination, we would be able to identify that commonality. And then when there are real differences, at least we'll know what they clearly are instead of tilting at windmills, which I think sometimes we do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Ben, do you have anything else?
No, I can come in and do our final housekeeping. I was trying to think about who might say it. I really like as many herded cats would say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us, David. We really are very grateful for your time, and folks have been listening the last few weeks to some other things we've done for GA, and so we trust that men will come here and be encouraged, and it's good to get a little preview of what's coming.
If they're going to be commissioners at the assembly, I would just plead for your listeners to be kind to me when I'm in the report. Remember, it's a partial report, and
that's right.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good word. Yeah. Y'all
been through a lot.
Give them some time to finish up. Yeah. Listeners, as you're here, we're probably less than a week away from the GA beginning. Please come and find us. I've just been, last night, sat up late bagging T-shirts, ready to hand them out when we get to GA. If you're a supporter, you have a T-shirt reserved for you if you've reached out to us, so make sure you find one of us and we will get that to you. I think Scott's got a bucket of lapel pins this year, too. They were such a hit last year. We're going to bring them back. And make sure you're subscribed. Make sure if you want to support that you've clicked the link. I don't think there's anything else much to say other than that we will see you not too much longer at General Assembly. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Y'all take care.